The stifling Mississippi heat of June 1985 offered no solace to the residents of Jackson, certainly not to the congregants of the First Baptist Church. A chilling discovery ripped through the quiet morning, shattering the illusion of peace that Sunday. Pastor Michael Grant, their beloved spiritual leader, lay lifeless in his church office, a scene of unspeakable tragedy. The image of the crime, stark and brutal, would forever be etched into the collective memory of a community that believed itself immune to such profound darkness. This was not merely a local news story. It was the genesis of a decades-long mystery, a wound that festered in the heart of Jackson, Mississippi, until an unexpected truth finally emerged years later. Pastor Michael Grant was more than just a man of God. He was the very bedrock of his community. His gentle demeanor, infectious optimism, and unwavering commitment to his flock made him a pillar of strength. Born and raised in Mississippi, Pastor Grant had dedicated his life to service, guiding generations through faith and compassion. He was known for his powerful sermons that moved hearts and his quiet acts of kindness that never sought recognition. With his loving wife, Sarah, by his side and two bright children, 12-year-old Emily and 15-year-old David, his personal life radiated the same warmth and dedication he showed his congregation. He championed local charities, organized food drives for the needy, and counseled countless individuals through their darkest hours. His influence extended far beyond the church walls, touching every corner of Jackson. The void his sudden departure created felt impossibly vast, a gaping chasm in the town's soul. The news of his murder struck like a seismic tremor. Disbelief quickly gave way to a sorrow so profound it silenced the usual Sunday morning bustle. Who could possibly wish harm upon Pastor Grant? The idea was inconceivable. The church, a sanctuary of peace and reflection, had been desecrated, transformed into a crime scene. A sense of vulnerability, alien and terrifying, crept into every home. The very foundation of their secure world had been shaken, leaving behind a chilling question: if this could happen to Pastor Grant, who was truly safe? The air hung heavy with grief, but beneath it, a quiet tremor of fear began to spread. Police swarmed the First Baptist Church, their flashing lights an unwelcome beacon against the somber brick. The initial hours of the investigation were a whirlwind of activity, a desperate scramble to secure evidence and make sense of the senseless. Detectives meticulously processed the office, documenting every detail, every possible clue. Uniformed officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen anything, heard anything unusual. Initial interviews with shell-shocked church members and distraught family yielded little beyond expressions of grief and shock. There were no obvious suspects, no clear motives, just a brutal act committed against a man universally loved. The immediate questions multiplied, each one echoing the community's anguish. The murder of Pastor Grant became the singular topic of conversation, dominating local news channels and newspaper headlines. Candlelight vigils sprang up spontaneously, drawing thousands from across Jackson, united in their mourning and their desperate plea for answers. The collective grief was palpable, but so too was a burgeoning fear. A profound sense of unease settled over Jackson, Mississippi. Parents held their children a little closer. Doors that once remained unlocked were now double-bolted. The illusion of their peaceful southern town had been irrevocably shattered. The community yearned for justice, for reassurance, for an end to the terrifying uncertainty that had descended upon them. They desperately hoped that the perpetrator would be brought to justice swiftly, but little did they know, this would be a saga that spanned decades. As this long and harrowing journey of seeking truth unfolds, please remember to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into true crime stories that demand to be told. The initial fervent hope for a swift resolution quickly dissolved into the frustrating reality of a baffling investigation. Detectives found themselves hitting roadblock after roadblock, their efforts stymied by the limitations of forensic science in the mid-1980s. While blood samples and fingerprints were collected, the sophisticated DNA profiling techniques we take for granted today simply did not exist. Each piece of evidence, though meticulously catalogued, lacked the definitive power that modern advancements would later provide. The technology of the era could only go so far, leaving critical gaps that prevented clear connections from being made. It was a time when policing relied heavily on eyewitness accounts, circumstantial evidence, and traditional investigative legwork, all of which, in this case, yielded infuriatingly few solid leads. The crime scene, while thoroughly processed by the standards of the day, held secrets that would remain locked away for decades. Early theories about Pastor Grant's killer circulated through the police department and the anxious community. Was this a random act of violence, a tragic encounter with a burglar in search of valuables? Or was it something far more personal, a vengeful act rooted in a hidden grudge? Investigators explored the possibility of a disgruntled church member, a parishioner he might have counseled who harbored dark resentments, or even a personal enemy from his past. Every lead, no matter how remote, had to be pursued. They looked into potential financial motives, though Pastor Grant was known for his modest life and dedication to charity. Red herrings abounded, leading detectives down dead ends that consumed valuable time and resources. Each discarded theory chipped away at the hope for a quick arrest, deepening the mystery and frustrating those desperate for answers. For Pastor Grant's family, the ordeal was an unending nightmare. Sarah, Emily, and David found themselves adrift in a sea of grief, their world shattered not only by loss but by the agonizing absence of explanation. Each passing day without an arrest felt like a fresh wound. Sarah, a woman of immense strength, struggled to hold her family together while battling her own profound sorrow and the constant gnawing question of why. Emily, just 12, lost her innocent belief in a safe world, while 15-year-old David grappled with a fury he couldn't direct. Their father, their rock, was gone, replaced by a haunting silence and the chilling uncertainty of an unpunished killer walking free. Friends and relatives offered comfort, but nothing could fill the void or quell the terror of the unknown. The case quickly became the most prominent local news story, fueling daily headlines and frantic reports. The pressure on the Jackson Police Department mounted with each passing day. Local reporters, sensing the community's desperation, hounded investigators for updates, amplifying the public's frustration. Editorials called for swift justice, and talk radio lines buzzed with speculation and fear. The narrative was clear: a beloved pastor murdered in his own church, and the police seemed no closer to finding the culprit. This intense media scrutiny, while reflecting the community's anguish, also added an immense burden to the already strained investigative team, creating an environment where every misstep felt magnified. Jackson, Mississippi, in 1985, was a city grappling with its own unique blend of tradition and emerging modernity. It was a place where community ties ran deep, particularly within faith institutions. The murder of a pastor, a symbol of moral authority and communal safety, struck at the very heart of this social fabric. Racial tensions, though less overt than in previous decades, still simmered beneath the surface, adding another layer of complexity to any high-profile crime. This was a city where people largely knew their neighbors, and the idea of a faceless killer targeting someone so revered was profoundly unsettling. The cultural dynamics of the time meant that such an act was not just a crime, but a violation of deeply held values and a challenge to the perceived order of things. The Jackson Police Department, despite the limitations, poured every available resource into the investigation. Officers meticulously canvassed every street surrounding the church, interviewing hundreds of residents, asking about unfamiliar vehicles, strange faces, or any unusual activity. Church members were questioned extensively, their alibis scrutinized, and their relationships with Pastor Grant explored. Detectives followed up on every single tip, no matter how fantastical, from late-night phone calls to anonymous letters. They worked tirelessly, driven by the gravity of the crime and the immense public outcry, determined to find the monster who had taken their beloved pastor. Yet, despite their relentless efforts, the leads grew colder with each passing week, and the promising trails began to fade into the agonizing quiet of an unsolved mystery. The relentless efforts of the Jackson Police Department, though exhaustive and well-intentioned, eventually yielded diminishing returns. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years, without a definitive breakthrough. The initial flurry of activity, the constant media presence, and the community's fervent hope gradually gave way to a somber acceptance. Pastor Michael Grant's murder, once the consuming focus of Jackson, slowly receded from the front pages, transitioning from an active investigation into a haunting cold case. File boxes containing witness statements, forensic reports, and dead-end leads were eventually moved from active detective desks to the quieter, dustier shelves of the Unsolved Crimes Archive. The case went cold, a tragic footnote in the city's history, but never truly forgotten by those whose lives it had irrevocably altered. The impact of this unsolved murder continued to cast a long, dark shadow over Jackson, Mississippi. It wasn't just a statistic. It was a scar on the collective memory of a community that had once felt so secure. Every church bell, every sermon, every community gathering was tinged with the unspoken sorrow of Pastor Grant's absence, and the chilling knowledge that his killer walked free. The innocence that had characterized Jackson before 1985 was gone, replaced by a lingering sense of vulnerability. It became a story whispered in hushed tones, a cautionary tale passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the most sacred of spaces, evil could lurk, and justice could be agonizingly slow, or worse, completely denied. The fear didn't dissipate entirely. It simply transmuted into a quiet vigilance, a constant undercurrent of unease. Despite the crushing weight of time and official inaction, Pastor Grant's family never surrendered their hope. Sarah, his wife, became a beacon of quiet persistence, regularly contacting investigators, even if only to hear the familiar, disheartening phrase, "No new leads." Emily and David, now adults, carried the torch of their father's memory, ensuring that his life, and the injustice of his death, were not forgotten. They wrote letters, they spoke to local journalists whenever the opportunity arose, and they participated in memorial events, always articulating their unwavering belief that one day, answers would come. Their persistence was not born of naive optimism, but of a profound love and an unshakable conviction that their father deserved justice, no matter how many decades it took. They understood that in the quiet solitude of a cold case, their vigilance was often the only thing keeping the flame of investigation from flickering out entirely. As the late 1990s gave way to the early 2000s, a new dawn began to break in the world of forensic science. Technological advancements, once the stuff of science fiction, became reality. DNA technology, particularly the ability to extract and analyze degraded samples, revolutionized criminal investigations. What was once an imprecise science of blood typing evolved into highly specific genetic profiling that could link a suspect directly to a crime scene with astonishing accuracy. New methods emerged for analyzing trace evidence, lifting fingerprints from challenging surfaces, and utilizing vast databases to cross-reference information. These breakthroughs offered a glimmer of hope to families like the Grants, whose loved ones' cases had languished in the pre-DNA era. The limitations that had plagued the 1985 investigation were slowly being dismantled, piece by painstaking piece, by the relentless march of scientific progress. Recognizing the immense potential of these new tools, law enforcement agencies across the country began to establish specialized cold case units. These units were staffed by seasoned detectives, often retired but brought back for their institutional knowledge and fresh perspectives, who were dedicated solely to revisiting unsolved mysteries. Their mandate was clear: to apply modern forensic techniques to old evidence, to re-interview witnesses with new information or improved memories, and to look at dormant files with fresh eyes, unburdened by the pressures of a live, frantic investigation. They understood that every cold case represented not just a crime, but a family's enduring pain and a community's unresolved grief. The formation of these units was a powerful acknowledgement that justice, though delayed, should never be abandoned. For the Grant family, the news of these technological advancements and the creation of cold case units brought a renewed, albeit cautious, optimism. After so many years of silence, of dashed hopes and closed doors, the possibility of a new look at their father's case felt like a lifeline. Sarah, Emily, and David followed news reports of cold cases being solved in other states, cases even older than Pastor Grant's, where DNA had finally provided the missing link. They held on to the belief that if justice could be found for others, it could, eventually, be found for Michael. The long, dark night of uncertainty had lasted for decades, but with the advent of these new tools, a faint, undeniable light began to appear on the horizon, promising answers after an agonizingly long silence. The faint, undeniable light on the horizon, promising answers after an agonizingly long silence, finally intensified. In the mid-2000s, almost 2 decades after Pastor Michael Grant's tragic murder, a dedicated cold case unit within the Jackson Police Department decided to pull his file from the dusty archives. It was a methodical process, driven by the belief that no case was truly unsolvable, especially with the leaps and bounds made in forensic science. The unit, led by Detective Thomas Riley, a veteran officer with a reputation for tenacity, understood the profound emotional weight that still clung to this particular unsolved crime. He knew the community still carried the scar, and the Grant family's unwavering hopes served as a constant, silent plea for resolution. This wasn't just another file. It was a ghost haunting Jackson. Detective Riley and his team meticulously reviewed every single piece of evidence collected in 1985. They pored over yellowed police reports, faded photographs of the crime scene, and transcripts of interviews with witnesses whose memories were now decades old. They scrutinized everything, looking for anomalies, for overlooked details, for anything that might have been dismissed as insignificant in an era before advanced forensics. Every fingerprint card was re-examined with newer digital enhancement techniques. Every fiber, every microscopic trace, was cataloged and cross-referenced. The task was monumental, like piecing together a shattered mosaic with half the pieces missing, but they approached it with a renewed sense of purpose, armed with technology that their predecessors could only dream of. Among the myriad items collected from Pastor Grant's office on that fateful June morning was a small, seemingly insignificant blood smear found on the edge of his desk. In 1985, tests confirmed it was human blood, but without advanced DNA profiling, it could not be conclusively linked to either the victim or a potential perpetrator. It was simply filed away, another inconclusive piece of the puzzle. Now, however, this tiny, dried stain became the focus of intense scrutiny. The cold case unit sent it to a specialized lab, requesting the most sophisticated DNA extraction and amplification techniques available. The process was painstaking. Working with degraded samples from so long ago required immense skill and patience. Scientists carefully worked to isolate and amplify the genetic material, hoping to construct a DNA profile that could finally provide an answer. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, shattering the quiet hum of the cold case unit office. The lab had achieved a successful profile from the degraded blood sample. More astonishingly, a search against the National CODIS database yielded a match. The name that flashed across the screen sent a collective shockwave through the investigative team. It wasn't a drifter, or a known violent criminal from another state who happened to pass through Jackson. The DNA belonged to a man named Robert Hayes. The name was instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the Jackson community. Robert Hayes was a respected local businessman, a devout churchgoer, and a pillar of several local charities. He had even been a pallbearer at Pastor Grant's funeral. The unthinkable had happened. The killer had been hiding in plain sight for decades, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Initial details about Robert Hayes painted a picture of a man beyond reproach. He owned a thriving construction company, was a deacon at a prominent Jackson church, not the First Baptist Church, but one closely affiliated, and had a reputation for generosity and community involvement. He was married with grown children and grandchildren, all seemingly unaware of the dark secret he had carried for 20 years. Hayes had no prior criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that would ever connect him to the brutal murder of Pastor Grant. The revelation was almost too incredible to believe. How could this seemingly upstanding citizen be linked to such a heinous crime? The investigative team immediately began to delve into Hayes's past, meticulously searching for any connection, any interaction, however fleeting, with Pastor Grant or the First Baptist Church that might provide a motive or clarify the DNA match. The gravity of the situation was immense. Arresting a man of Robert Hayes's standing, especially after so many years, required impeccable planning and flawless execution. Detective Riley understood the potential for public outcry, the disbelief, and the damage to community trust if anything went wrong. They worked in strict secrecy, building an undeniable case around the DNA evidence. Legal teams were consulted, warrants meticulously prepared, and an arrest strategy was carefully formulated. The goal was to apprehend Hayes without incident, preserving the integrity of the investigation and ensuring that this long-awaited justice was delivered without jeopardizing the hard-won breakthrough. The decades-long wait was finally nearing its end, and the truth, though shocking, was about to be laid bare for all of Jackson to confront. The dramatic moment arrived precisely as planned, a stark contrast to the quiet subtlety of the decades-long investigation. Early one crisp morning, unmarked police vehicles converged discreetly on the affluent Jackson neighborhood where Robert Hayes resided. The arrest itself was swift and methodical, designed to minimize disruption yet leave no room for doubt. As Detective Riley and his team approached Hayes's sprawling home, the scene unfolded with a quiet gravity fitting for the culmination of a 20-year mystery. Hayes, a man who had seemingly lived an unblemished life since the murder, was taken into custody without incident, his initial composure slowly giving way to a stunned disbelief that rippled through the air. The handcuffs, a stark symbol of his newfound reality, clicked into place, closing a chapter that had remained stubbornly open for far too long. News of Robert Hayes's arrest exploded across Jackson with the force of an undetonated bomb finally detonating. Disbelief was the prevailing emotion, quickly followed by a maelstrom of shock, betrayal, and a sickening sense of unease. How could this be? Robert Hayes, the respected businessman, the generous philanthropist, the devout church pillar, arrested for the murder of Pastor Michael Grant? It was incomprehensible. Conversations halted mid-sentence, coffee cups clattered in disbelief, and phones buzzed incessantly as the news spread like wildfire through churches, community centers, and local businesses. People who had admired him, who had sought his counsel, who had even received his charity, struggled to reconcile the image of the man they knew with the monstrous accusation now laid against him. The community grappled with a profound sense of betrayal. It wasn't just a crime, it was a violation of trust from within their own ranks. How could someone so trusted, so seemingly good, harbor such a dark secret and be capable of such a heinous act? The revelation of the suspect's identity sent shockwaves not only through the Jackson community, but directly into the heart of the investigation. Robert Hayes, aged 58 at the time of his arrest, was not merely a casual acquaintance of Pastor Grant. While not a member of First Baptist Church, he had known Pastor Grant through interchurch council meetings and various community charity initiatives both men were involved in. He had donated generously to several of Pastor Grant's outreach programs. He had even, as the detectives later confirmed, attended Pastor Grant's funeral, offering condolences to Sarah Grant, standing shoulder to shoulder with other mourners, his face a mask of solemn grief. This connection magnified the horror. The killer wasn't a stranger, but someone who moved within their circles, a figure of respect who had worn a mask of normalcy for 2 decades. His involvement was not just unthinkable. It was a deeply unsettling reminder of how little one can truly know about another. During initial interrogations, Hayes maintained a facade of indignant innocence, vehemently denying any involvement in Pastor Grant's murder. He expressed shock, outrage, claiming a mistaken identity, a wrongful accusation. His voice, usually calm and measured, was now tinged with a carefully controlled anger. Detectives presented him with the irrefutable DNA evidence, watching for any flicker of recognition or guilt. For hours, he clung to his denials, attempting to poke holes in the police's narrative, questioning the integrity of the evidence. However, as the interrogation progressed, and the weight of scientific proof became impossible to deflect, his denials began to lose their fervent conviction. The facade, though strong, was beginning to crack under the relentless pressure of 2 decades of hidden truth finally coming to light. The detectives, seasoned in reading human behavior, saw the subtle shifts, the nervous tics, the averted gaze, the slight tremor in his voice, that betrayed the cracks in his carefully constructed innocence. The DNA match was the linchpin, but it was just the beginning of building an airtight case. Following Hayes's arrest, a flurry of activity ensued. Search warrants were executed on his home and business, meticulously seeking any physical evidence that could corroborate the DNA, diaries, financial records, or anything that might shed light on a motive or a connection to the 1985 crime. Detectives revisited old witnesses, refreshing their memories with the new information, looking for anyone who might have seen Hayes near the church on the night of the murder, or who might have observed any unusual behavior from him in the days or weeks following Pastor Grant's death. They delved into his financial history, his relationships, and any potential conflicts that might have existed between him and the late pastor. The goal was to construct a comprehensive narrative, weaving together the scientific evidence with circumstantial facts to paint a complete picture for a jury. With the overwhelming DNA evidence and the mounting corroborating details, the legal process against Robert Hayes began to unfold rapidly. He was formally charged with the first-degree murder of Pastor Michael Grant. The bond hearing drew an unprecedented crowd, with media from across the state descending on Jackson. The judge, recognizing the gravity of the crime and the strength of the evidence, denied bail, ensuring Hayes would remain in custody as the case moved forward. The decades-old cold case, once relegated to the archives, was now a live, active criminal prosecution, preparing to enter the courtroom. For the Grant family, it was a bittersweet moment, relief that an arrest had finally been made, but also the daunting realization that the painful journey through the justice system was only just beginning, bringing with it the public reopening of old wounds. The courtroom, packed to capacity, held its breath, awaiting the prosecution's opening statements. Every eye was fixed on Robert Hayes, the seemingly unassuming man now at the center of a decades-old murder mystery. The motive behind Pastor Grant's murder remained the most elusive piece of the puzzle. The DNA had identified the killer, but it offered no explanation for why. The prosecution, led by a seasoned district attorney, began the painstaking process of piecing together the events of that fateful night, delving into Hayes's life in the months leading up to the murder. Through careful financial forensics, investigators uncovered that Robert Hayes's once thriving construction business was on the brink of collapse in 1985, a secret he had meticulously hidden even from his family. Pastor Grant, known for his financial acumen and charitable work, had been approached by Hayes for a substantial, discreet loan for his business, a loan the pastor had ultimately denied, citing ecclesiastical rules against using church funds for private ventures. This refusal, the prosecution posited, had ignited a desperate fury within Hayes, a man who saw his entire carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The motive, therefore, was not random violence or a personal vendetta in the traditional sense, but a desperate act born of financial ruin and a perceived betrayal. Old interviews conducted in 1985 were revisited, not just for new information, but for subtle clues that might have been overlooked. One witness, a rarely seen late-night janitor at the church, who had initially reported seeing nothing unusual, was re-interviewed. Under renewed questioning, and with the passage of time easing some fear, he recalled seeing a car, similar in make and color to Robert Hayes's vehicle, parked suspiciously close to the church office late that night. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, given Hayes's community involvement, but the memory now gained chilling significance. Another former church board member recalled a heated, though private, discussion between Pastor Grant and Robert Hayes just weeks before the murder, a hushed argument witnessed from afar but never understood until now. These testimonies, once fragments, now coalesced into a clearer picture, illuminating the desperate undercurrents beneath Hayes's polished exterior. The highly anticipated trial of Robert Hayes began amidst a media frenzy. Reporters from national news outlets joined the local press, all vying for space in the overcrowded courtroom. The public interest was immense. This wasn't just a murder trial, it was the reopening of a deeply painful wound in the community's heart, a chance for catharsis and, finally, understanding. Every seat in the gallery was filled, many by longtime residents of Jackson, some of whom had attended Pastor Grant's funeral decades earlier, their faces a mixture of grim determination and fervent hope for justice. The air crackled with anticipation as the judicial process, so long delayed, finally began to unfold, promising to unveil the truth concealed for so long. The prosecution methodically presented its case, beginning with the emotional testimony of Sarah Grant, whose quiet dignity and enduring pain resonated deeply with the jury. Then came the undeniable scientific evidence. The degraded blood sample from the desk, carefully preserved for decades, now spoke volumes. Forensic experts detailed the meticulous process of DNA extraction and profiling, explaining how the genetic material definitively matched Robert Hayes. They presented photographic evidence of Hayes's vehicle, matching the janitor's belated recollection. They laid out the compelling financial motive, illustrating Hayes's mounting debts and his desperate plea to Pastor Grant, culminating in the denial. Each piece of evidence, from the microscopic to the financial, was a carefully placed brick in the wall of the prosecution's argument, building a compelling and seemingly unbreakable case. The defense, led by an experienced public defender, faced an uphill battle against the weight of the DNA evidence. Their strategy centered on sowing doubt, questioning the integrity of the evidence chain of custody over 2 decades, suggesting potential contamination of the blood sample, or even a frame-up. They argued that while the DNA placed Hayes at the scene, it didn't prove he was the killer, merely that he had been in the office at some point. The defense attempted to discredit the janitor's decades-old memory, labeling it unreliable and possibly influenced by recent media reports. They downplayed the financial motive, portraying Hayes as a generous man who had merely sought counsel, not a loan, from his pastor. They painted him as a respected community member, a family man, suggesting he was incapable of such violence, attempting to leverage his public image against the damning evidence. For the Grant family, sitting in the front row, the trial was an agonizing endurance test. Each piece of evidence, every detail of their beloved Michael's last night, tore open old wounds. Sarah clutched Emily and David's hands, reliving the nightmare, but also drawing strength from their presence. The defense's attempts to discredit the evidence, to portray Robert Hayes as a victim of circumstance, felt like a personal affront to their memory of Michael. Yet, despite the pain, they remained steadfast, their eyes fixed on the proceedings, their hearts aching but resolute. They had waited for this moment for decades, and though difficult, they knew this was the path to the justice Michael deserved, the painful but necessary journey towards peace and understanding. The trial built to its inevitable climax, a crucible where 2 decades of hidden truths would either forge justice or melt into further doubt. The most intense moments arrived during the cross-examination of Robert Hayes himself. He took the stand, confident at first, recounting his version of events from 1985, his voice steady. However, the prosecuting attorney, a sharp and relentless interrogator, systematically dismantled his narrative. She hammered away at the inconsistencies in his alibi, the sudden, unexplained repayment of several key loans in the months following Pastor Grant's death, and perhaps most powerfully, the question of why, if he was so innocent, he never voluntarily offered to provide a DNA sample when questioned much earlier in the cold case investigation when the technology was available. Hayes faltered, his carefully constructed composure cracking. Under the sustained pressure, he mumbled about privacy, about not wanting to be involved, but his words rang hollow against the prosecution's fierce counterarguments. The courtroom held its breath as a hushed gasp rippled through the gallery when the prosecutor, with a dramatic flair, produced a faded, handwritten note. It was a simple IOU for $2,000, signed by Robert Hayes, found tucked inside Pastor Grant's personal Bible. Dated a week before the murder, it directly contradicted Hayes's claim that he had never received a loan, only sought counsel. This single, tangible piece of evidence seemed to shatter the defense's narrative completely, revealing a deeper, more direct financial entanglement than previously admitted. Yet, a glimmer of doubt, a fleeting moment of suspense, appeared when the defense counsel brought forward an unexpected character witness. An elderly woman, a longtime member of Hayes's church, tearfully testified to his unwavering kindness, his charitable spirit, and his consistent presence in the community, even after Pastor Grant's death. She spoke of his grief, his genuine sorrow at the funeral, suggesting it was inconceivable that such a man could commit such a heinous act. Her testimony, delivered with heartfelt sincerity, momentarily swayed some observers, reminding them of the good Robert Hayes they all knew. The defense attorney seized this opportunity, arguing that Hayes's character, his decades of community service, outweighed the circumstantial financial motive and that the DNA, while present, could have been transferred inadvertently. This line of argument, though tenuous against the direct evidence, created a brief, unsettling uncertainty, a fleeting question mark in a case that had otherwise seemed meticulously constructed. The pivotal revelation, however, wasn't a last-minute confession, but a meticulous reconstruction presented by the prosecution. They called to the stand an expert in crime scene reconstruction who, using advanced digital modeling, demonstrated how the blood smear on the desk could only have occurred during a violent struggle, not through casual contact. This expert, combined with the IOU and the undeniable financial records, provided the long-awaited answers. Hayes hadn't gone to the church that night for a casual chat. He had gone to demand money, leveraging the IOU, perhaps even threatening to expose Pastor Grant's perceived breach of trust. When Grant refused, upholding his ethical boundaries, the confrontation escalated. The prosecution painted a vivid, disturbing picture of a desperate man lashing out in a moment of rage, the pastor caught in a fatal embrace with the very person he had tried to help. This narrative clarified the motive, transformed the DNA from mere presence to active participation, and provided a chilling explanation for that fateful night. Following over a week of intense testimony and arguments, the case was finally handed over to the jury. The nervous waiting period that ensued felt interminable to everyone in the courtroom, especially the Grant family. Every minute stretched into an hour, every hour into an eternity. The community of Jackson was on edge, local news channels running continuous updates, discussing every possible outcome. Would the jury be swayed by the defense's character arguments, or would the weight of the DNA and the reconstructed motive prove too strong? The fate of a man, and the long-delayed justice for a beloved pastor, rested in the hands of 12 citizens. The silence of the deliberation room was deafening, amplified by the collective anticipation outside. Finally, after 2 days of deliberations, the jury sent word: a verdict had been reached. The courtroom fell into an immediate, profound silence as everyone rose, eyes glued to the jury box. Robert Hayes entered, his face pale, his gaze fixed straight ahead. The foreperson handed the verdict forms to the bailiff, who then passed them to the judge. The judge's voice, clear and steady, cut through the tension. In the matter of the state of Mississippi versus Robert Hayes, for the charge of first-degree murder, we the jury find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp, followed by a quiet sob from Sarah Grant, punctuated the pronouncement. Emily and David embraced their mother, tears streaming down their faces, tears of sorrow for their father, but also tears of an overwhelming, long-awaited relief. Robert Hayes remained outwardly stoic, but a slight tremor in his jaw betrayed the crushing weight of the verdict. The aftermath of the verdict was immediate and profound. Sentencing followed within weeks. Robert Hayes received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, a legal consequence that finally brought a formal end to the judicial process. The judge's words, though delivered with solemnity, carried the force of 2 decades of unresolved grief and the community's demand for accountability. The sentencing closed the chapter on the legal battle, but the emotional ripples would continue for years. For the Grant family, it was not a moment of celebration, but a quiet, deeply personal sense of closure. The man who had taken Michael from them would now pay the ultimate price under the law, ensuring he could never harm another, never walk free. Justice, though delayed, had finally been served. The final judgment, delivered with such solemnity, offered Sarah Grant and her children a profound sense of resolution. It wasn't triumph, not joy, but a deep, quiet exhale of relief. For 20 years, the specter of Michael's killer walking free had haunted their every waking moment, a constant ache beneath the surface of their lives. Now, that chapter was definitively closed. Robert Hayes would spend the remainder of his days incarcerated, a consequence unequivocally tied to his heinous act. This legal finality, though it could never bring Michael back, provided a necessary foundation for the family to begin a new phase of healing, one unburdened by the gnawing uncertainty of an unpunished crime. The wheels of justice, though agonizingly slow, had turned. This comprehensive narrative, spanning decades, is a testament to the enduring power of persistence and the relentless march of technological progress. Pastor Michael Grant's murder in 1985 remained a cold case for so long due to the limitations of forensic science at the time, particularly the absence of advanced DNA analysis. Detectives in the 1980s, despite their best efforts, simply lacked the tools to definitively link the small blood smear at the crime scene to a perpetrator. It was only the formation of dedicated cold case units in the 2000s, coupled with the revolutionary advancements in DNA profiling, that allowed investigators to revisit the old evidence with new eyes and unprecedented capabilities. The re-examination of that tiny, degraded blood sample, once deemed inconclusive, became the linchpin, leading to the shocking identification of Robert Hayes. The meticulous work of forensic scientists, combined with the tenacity of Detective Riley and his team, painstakingly piecing together Hayes's financial motive and the contextual evidence, finally brought the full story to light. It is a story of how an unyielding commitment to truth, paired with scientific innovation, can transcend the boundaries of time, ensuring that even the most deeply buried secrets eventually surface. The emotional conclusion of this saga resonated deeply within the town of Jackson, Mississippi. The conviction of Robert Hayes, a man once held in high regard, forced a painful reckoning, but also allowed for long overdue communal healing. Pastor Michael Grant's legacy, once overshadowed by the mystery of his death, could now shine brightly again. He was remembered not just as a victim, but as the compassionate, guiding light he had always been. The resolution brought a measure of peace to countless individuals who had carried the burden of this unsolved crime for so long. It removed a lingering shadow, allowing the community to breathe a collective sigh of relief and begin to address the underlying psychological wounds. Jackson learned that even when evil hides behind a facade of respectability, truth, given enough time and dedication, will always prevail. The enduring memory of Pastor Grant transformed from a symbol of tragedy into a powerful reminder that justice, though sometimes slow, is ultimately attainable. This case serves as a poignant message of hope, underscoring the critical importance of cold case investigations. It reminds us that no case is truly beyond resolution, and no victim should ever be forgotten. The dedication of law enforcement agencies and forensic scientists to revisit these dormant files is not merely about closing cases. It is about providing answers to grieving families, upholding the integrity of the justice system, and affirming society's commitment to accountability. For every family agonizing over an unsolved crime, the story of Pastor Michael Grant offers a powerful testament to persistence. It shows that even after decades, with the right resources and unwavering determination, the pursuit of truth can ultimately lead to justice, bringing closure where there was once only despair. It is a powerful affirmation that we should never, ever give up on the pursuit of truth. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly personal and deeply impactful journey through the coldest of cases. Your engagement with these stories helps us shine a light on the victims and the tireless work of those who seek justice. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you more in-depth true crime stories that deserve to be told, ensuring that the legacy of those lost is never forgotten. Join us next time as we delve into the mysterious disappearance of a young hiker in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, a case riddled with strange clues and an even stranger outcome.